Welcome and aloha, g'day and howdy all. So yesterday we had quite a day. For those of you that weren't here, we began this webinar, and about exactly 38 minutes into it, we had a major blackout and power was out for 17 hours. And for those of you that went through that, you got to meet Jazz Marlin, who's been working with us in Hawaii since 2006. So he's been working with us on various exopolitics projects. So you got a chance to meet with him. He's the webmaster of exopolitics.org and does a lot of my videography for Exopolitics Today. So I'm glad you got a chance to meet him. Now, I thought it was really interesting, the timing of the blackout. I mean, I had just finished talking and was setting up to say a lot more about a major organization who I'm going to refer to very soon in terms of the key topic of today's webinar, which is these ancient technologies that have been found all over the earth and the information that is now coming forward, that these technologies are going to be revealed as like a first phase in a multifaceted disclosure initiative. So I'll walk you through all of that. And yeah, the big question I'm sure a lot of you have is, well, if this organization and the deep state have been suppressing the release of these technologies for decades, why the change of heart? Well, I will talk about that, and maybe you'll get an idea as to exactly what motivates the deep state. So a good place to begin in terms of the ancient world, and I think a nice segue into that is that what happened yesterday with my webinar is we had a power blackout. What essentially happened was that there was a tree that, or a number of trees, because the power out was out for 17 hours here. So a number of trees fell onto power lines because of these high winds. I mean, we had wind gusts of around 40, 50 miles an hour. I know there are places that had them gusting a lot higher than that, but here that was enough to take down the trees so that the power lines went. And of course, the power lines deliver AC electricity to houses, and that, of course, powers our electrical devices. Well, imagine in the ancient world that they didn't have an electrical grid like that, that rather than an electrical grid that relied on power lines, telephone poles, you had an electrical grid that transmitted electricity wirelessly. That power could be transmitted through the atmosphere to wherever you're going. Now, I mean, that sounds pretty far-fetched given what our present state of knowledge is in the kind of like open source literature. But in fact, there have been a number of people, a number of very credible researchers that have said, looking through the ancient literature, that there is a lot of evidence that there was this ancient grid. So this grid was once something that could be found all over the world. It was an Atlantean era global power grid. And these were spaced in a particular way so that you could transmit power wirelessly wherever people were or wherever airplanes and advanced technologies needed to be able to tap into that energy source. So this grid was reliant on the pyramids, and the pyramids were something that were built using crystals embedded into the architecture of the crystals to generate electricity. So this is something that a number of researchers have pointed out. Probably the best source to go to kind of get this idea presented in a nutshell is David Hatcher Childress's book, Technology of the Gods, The Incredible Sciences of the Ancients. So he goes through an extensive number of technologies that the ancients had. And he identified crystals in the construction of the pyramids as something that was fundamental for understanding what the real use of the pyramids was. Now, of course, according to conventional archaeologists and Egyptologists, they will tell you that the pyramids were simply mausoleums for pharaohs. But of course, there's never been a tomb found of a pharaoh in the pyramids. All the mummies of the pharaohs were found in the Valley of the Kings, not in the Giza pyramid complex. So clearly the pyramid Giza complex was used for something else, even though conventional archaeologists kind of perpetuate this idea that the pyramids were nothing more than just very big, elaborate places for burial chambers for the pharaohs. But David Hatcher Childress and many others point to the data that shows that the pyramids had within them this crystals placed at particular points, so that way you could actually generate a piezoelectric effect. And because of the Earth's movement, I mean, the Earth is constantly moving. I mean, very subtly. We don't feel it because our muscles accommodate for those subtle shifts. But a very large device like a pyramid is constantly under that pressure. And if you have crystals within the pyramid, that they're going to be pressured and they're going to go through various points of pressure, and that's going to release piezoelectricity. That's actually an effect that is well known, the piezoelectric effect. So this is how the pyramids were used. And there are a number of sources that identify the kind of understanding that went into the construction of the pyramids where this kind of piezoelectric effect was utilized. The law of one that describes this, we are those of the Confederation of Planets, so that during the Atlantean era, apparently the Confederation of Worlds came along and kind of like shared this knowledge about the piezoelectric effect. And the law of one session continued, who 11,000 of your years ago came, we attempted to aid with the healing of the mind-body-spirit complex through the use of the crystal placed within certain appropriate series of ratios of time-space material. Thus were the pyramids created. So there you have a kind of very clear allusion to the piezoelectric effect, that you place crystals in a particular arrangement where they're separated in according to various ratios, and that can create a very powerful piezoelectric effect. So if you're talking about a large structure like the pyramid, that could generate sufficient electricity to power not only the local community, that could also be used to power flying craft. And we'll talk a little bit about the evidence that ancient Egypt did use these craft. So I think that's something that I believe did exist in the ancient world, that there was the generation of electricity using this understanding without the transmission of wired electricity. So in the ancient world, they had wireless transmission of electricity. We utilize wired transmission of electricity, which is very complex, very expensive, and of course is prone to break down during adverse weather conditions, whereas wireless transmission of electricity can proceed quite well. Now, who built the pyramids? This is where we get into a very interesting historical figure, which is Thoth, or Jehuti, as I believe the Egyptians pronounce or call him. So the pyramids were built by Thoth the Atlantean, and there's this very famous book called the Emerald Tablets that was apparently channeled by Doriel, and it's been cited extensively, and there are a number of people that talk about this, the Emerald Tablets that Doriel channeled and presented in his book as actually being based on ancient literature that goes all the way back to the alchemists of the 14th and 15th century in England and elsewhere in Europe. So this is what Thoth had to say about the building of the pyramids. I, Thoth, the Atlantean, master of mysteries, keeper of records, mighty king, magician, living from generation to generation, being about to pass into the halls of Amenti, set down for the guidance of those that are coming to come after, these records of the mighty wisdom of great Atlantis. So a couple of important points to keep in mind here. He's talking about the halls of Amenti. So, what are the halls of Amenti? More about that soon. And also the records of the mighty wisdom of great Atlantis. So the pyramids were not designed to be mausoleums for pharaohs. They had, one of their functions was, I've already described, generation of electricity that could be wirelessly transmitted, but also preserving the records of Atlantis. And Thoth was an Atlantean. So he continues, builded I the great pyramid, patterned after the pyramid of earth force, burning eternally, so that it too might remain through the ages. In it I built my knowledge of magic science, so that I might be here when again I return from Amenti. So some really interesting points in here. He's talking about the pyramid of earth force. So what does he mean by earth force? I could take a guess that's something to do with this kind of piezoelectric effect that is generated by the earth being able to, the earth has a lot of crystals in it. And so as the earth moves seismically, it generates electricity. I mean, this is one of the things that Nikola Tesla demonstrated, that lightning bolts don't just come from the atmosphere, the upper atmosphere, but that they can actually come from the earth. And Tesla understood that the earth actually is also a generator. So, and of course, he was able to utilize that energy from the earth to generate electricity. Some might call that free energy. So I think that's what Thoth is referring to here. And he talks about the knowledge of magic science, which I believe is alchemy. And finally, he says, when I return from Amenti. So he's talking about going to this place called Amenti, spending time there, and then returning at some time, at some age, when humanity would be ready for the secrets to be returned. So let's continue. So this is a new slide for those that were here yesterday. Pyramids were built by Thoth the Atlantean, and this is what he says about where are the halls of Amenti. He says, there in the halls of life, Amenti, they lie sleeping. Free flows their soul through the bodies of men. Time after time, while their bodies lie sleeping, incarnate, they are in the bodies of men, teaching and guiding onward and upward, out of the darkness into the light. So what Thoth is describing here is that when he goes into the halls of Amenti, his body lies sleeping, but his soul leaves and then incarnates in the bodies of men, teaching and guiding. So that's very interesting. So it gives us a little bit of a clue about what the function of the halls of Amenti are, that these, what you call Thoth, I mean, a god king, a scientist, an Anunnaki, that these beings go into some kind of hibernation, and they are preserved there for a very long time in the halls of Amenti, and their soul leaves the body and they incarnate as great teachers. So we can imagine, say, Sir Isaac Newton, Nikola Tesla, I mean, whoever you might think, that these might be reincarnations of beings like Thoth the Atlantean. But at the time when the earth is ready to return or integrate these ancient sciences, Thoth will come back from Amenti, and the way I interpret that is that body, his original body that is sleeping in Amenti, awakens. So, where are the halls of Amenti? And I'm sure many of you my guess, there have been a lot of people that have thought it's some kind of metaphysical location. But I think, based on the information one of my sources has given, that the Halls of Amenti is in none other than Florida. So are the Halls of Amenti in Florida, under Florida? Well, here's a mission that JP, and those of you who follow my work know JP is serving with the US Army, and he is sent on these missions, and he is allowed to report about these missions, and I can release these. This is something that is allowed by his superiors within the covert branch of the military, not so much in his conventional chain of command, who look at what he's doing in quite questionable terms, but they're being told to stand down, not to punish him, because higher-ups in the covert world are saying, he's been given the okay to do this. So he went to an underground civilization in Florida. So that's a podcast I did, an interview that's available on Exopolitics today. So that describes what he saw down there. And just to recapitulate what he saw when he went on this mission, he was greeted. He was part of a team, a squad. I think it was eight soldiers, and they went down there, and they were greeted by a race of beings called the Ant People. Very similar to Hopi legends of the Ant People, a kind of insectoid-looking race that are very, very ancient. And if you read the message from Sasquatch, that is something that Sunbo True Brother channeled from his communications with a chief Sasquatch. The Ant People were the very first people on Earth. The Ant People, very interesting. So JP went to Florida, and he was greeted. He and his team were greeted by the Ant People, and they were taken down into this underground kingdom. And it was very lush, very green, as you can see in the diagram there. And in it, they saw a big tree, and this tree was straddling a stream, and its roots were going into the stream and absorbing the water, and the water would go through the trunks and then would come out through the branches and drip down. And the water that had been filtered through this tree was very rejuvenating. It would heal people. It could prolong life. So it is very similar to the tree of life, as described is in ancient literature. Now, what JP also saw in this cavern by the Ant People was he saw a giant sleeping. And I think he described the giant as around 12 feet tall, with a very long beard, looking very ancient, in a stone sarcophagus that was at an incline. And he said that the giant, he and his team were quite shocked to see this giant, but the Ant People were very in reverence to this giant. They were obviously protecting him, but also they gave JP and humanity a gift, which was some seeds from the tree of life. And so JP left with his team, and what happened to those seeds? I described that in subsequent interviews. So you can find that on exopolitics.org. So who was that giant? So now we kind of fast forward to just before the October 2022 this Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection Conference in Orlando. Elena Danan came and visited me in Tennessee, East Tennessee, and we spent a few days together just touring around, and she got a communication from Thorhan about this giant in Florida, because one of the missions, one of the key things that JP had to find out from his superiors was, who was this giant? Who was it? He didn't know. So according to Thorhan, the information that Elena got was that this giant was none other than Ningishzida. And Ningish Zida is the Sumerian name for an Anunnaki known as the god of the good tree. He was the custodian of the tree of life, according to Anunnaki legends. So it fit with what JP saw, that this place was where you had a giant Ningish Zida in a state of in hibernation next to this tree of life. And according to the information Elena got and some other sources, Ningish is none other than Thoth. That Thoth is also a name used the same as the kind of the feathered serpent, as of course you see here. Thoth is looks like a bird. Well, in Mesoamerican literature, they talk about Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, Viracocha. These are similar names for an Atlantean who brought to the Americas some ancient knowledge. And so the information we got was that this was Ningish Zida. And so if that's correct, and Ningish Zida is none other than Thoth, then what JP saw pretty closely matches what Doriel describes about Thoth and the halls of Amenti. In the Emerald Tablets, it describes Thoth as being in a state of hibernation, and it mentions that Amenti is a place that's associated with rejuvenation, eternal life, again, the tree of life. And this mismatches with exactly what Ningish Zida was supposed to be the god for, according to Anunnaki legends. So I think you can make a good case that the halls of Amenti are actually in Florida, southern Florida, in the Emerald Coast area of Florida, which is, again, another synchronicity, the Emerald Coast, beautiful part of the world. And also you have the Emerald Tablets, and green is associated with Thoth. So now let's get to this idea of the records, the Hall of Records, the ancient Atlantean wisdom. Where was this placed? Where was this preserved? So we go to a book by Rico Paganini, where he wrote Giza Legacy based on his many expeditions to Giza and other places around the world, where he got to do a lot of research, and he found out some important information about the Hall of Records. And he was in his book, he tabulates, he actually puts together a really nice diagram showing two chambers that have been found in the Hall of Records. And you can see the very top half of that diagram. It shows you this is the large chamber, and then over here you have the smaller chamber. And underneath here, it gives you a little bit more information about the small chamber and the large chamber. And these are names down here. These are the names of different science expeditions or scientific experiments, kind of ground penetrating radar and so forth, that found these chambers. So what is in these chambers? So we can look at the Edgar Cayce readings. Edgar Cayce, of course, the sleeping prophet, very famous. He channeled this information. Quote, when Rata and his people arrived in Egypt, they conducted archaeological research. They began to build upon those mounds that were discovered through research. With the storehouse or record house, where the records are still to be uncovered, there is a chamber or passage from the right forepaw to this entrance of the record chamber or record tome. So according to Cayce, when you look at the right paw, there's a chamber, and right there in the Sphinx. So now exactly what is in that? What is in the Hall of Records? Well, there's been a lot of speculation about that. And shortly, I'm going to give you some idea of what might be down there. But I think the key thing is that there has been something that has happened recently, which I think is a very clear sign that the deep state has green-lighted the release of some of this information about the ancient technologies that are there, that are associated with the Giza complex, whether we're talking about the pyramids, it being a massive electrical generator of free energy, or whether it's the Sphinx being a repository for these ancient Atlantean records, that the deep state, I believe, has green-lighted this to come out. Now, why do I say that? Well, let's begin with this very recent announcement that made major news around the world, and it describes this corridor that was found in the Great Pyramid that previously wasn't known, and a lot of speculation began to grow around, well, what could this corridor lead to? So you can see, I mean, how this hidden chamber was just recently discovered. And of course, you know, they have the Queen's chamber, the King's chamber, you know, making it seem that this is where the King and the Queen were buried. But in fact, these are key rooms that can be connected to this kind of like electricity generating transmission generator that the pyramid really was. And so I think what is going to be revealed is probably going to be information that overturns conventional archaeological thinking about the pyramids being tombs into maybe looking at the pyramids as giant electrical conductors or fulfilling some other function. So what makes me say this? Well, what we have very recently is an announcement that was made by none other than Dr. Zawi Hawass, who was the former head of Egypt's Antiquities Division. And so he was the guy that was most often associated with the cover-up of this ancient knowledge in the pyramids and in the Sphinx. And if you ask a lot of alternative researchers, Graham Hancock, Robert Preval, others that have done research on the Giza complex, I mean, they will be pretty much in consensus that Zawi Hawass is a bad guy. But I think that that understanding is going to be overturned by what the role he's going to be playing in the future. And why do I say that? Well, let's begin first with the announcement that he made very recently about this discovery and why he is saying that there are going to be a lot more mysteries that are going to be revealed as a result of this discovery. So let's play that video.
But again, we are in front of a major important discovery happened inside the Great Pyramid. And this discovery will enter houses and homes of people all over the world for the first time. And Egypt will be the talk of the name of Egypt will be everywhere. And I have to say at the end something very important. We have people everywhere still talking about aliens, and people came out of the space. And even many people accuse me of hiding evidence about lost civilization. Now, this discovery can tell them anything that we discover inside the pyramid, we announce it for the first time. Finally, I have to thank the Scan Pyramid team that put Egypt's name and the Ministry of Antiquities and Tourism everywhere. And therefore, I have to say we are in front of a major important discovery that everyone has to decide that and see that this corridor inside the pyramid will lead to more revealing secrets of Khufu pyramid. And thank you.
So that was Zawi Hawass, and excuse the poor transcription there. And I know he speaks with a very heavy Egyptian accent, so maybe some of you didn't quite understand what he was saying. But he was just confirming that there was this new discovery and that there would be more mysteries or new mysteries found, and that for the first time, these would be revealed. Now, that's very interesting. Why would he say that? Why would he say that these secrets would be revealed for the first time? What I believe he's suggesting here is that previously these secrets were suppressed. He was not part of that, even though the conventional, as I said, understanding is that he was part of the suppression system. And certainly he was the way in which a lot of this information was suppressed, but he wasn't the person behind it. Now, why do I say that? Well, this is where I turn to Elena Danaan. And I know many of you are very familiar with Elena's work as a contactee, working with the Galactic Federation as an emissary and meeting beings like Enki and beings like Una from the Cedars. But prior to all of this, Elena was an actual professional archaeologist in France and Egypt. And she spent time in Egypt, and she got to be friends with Dr. Zahi Hawass. So there's a photo of her and Dr. Hawass. I think this was when she had just, or maybe during or soon after she had finished being a graduate student and began working in Egypt. And you can see on that side there, the right-hand side, there she's doing some kind of restorative work on glyphs in Egypt. So she was a professional archaeologist, so she knows about the ins and outs of what was happening. And she has said, based on her experience, that Zahi Hawass was not the person that people believe. He was not the one that was behind the cover-up. That, in fact, it was the Freemasons that ran the Giza complex. That nothing could be revealed in the Giza complex without the permission of the Freemasons, who had penetrated and were in high positions of authority not only in the United States, but also within Egypt. And that Hawass was really just following orders. And if he didn't follow orders, he would have been replaced by someone else that would have done things, would have been much more amenable to their efforts to suppress this information. Now, a very interesting kind of anecdote that Elena has shared in the past, I mean, it's in, I believe it's in one of her books, the last book, The Cedars, or at least in an interview where she talked about Dr. Hawass actually inviting her to see what was under the Sphinx, inviting her to see the records or some secrets or mysteries under the Sphinx. Now, I'm sure it had nothing to do with the fact that Elena was a very pretty, intelligent French archaeologist, and that Zahi Hawass just was doing it out of pure collaboration among scientific peers. But nevertheless, he accompanied Elena down, he led Elena down into this entranceway under the Sphinx. And Elena says that she started to go down, and at a certain point she began to feel claustrophobic. And she felt some energy there that was very strange. And at that time, she wasn't yet kind of like habituated to these kinds of energies, and she had to leave. And so, but nevertheless, it shows that there were secrets under the Sphinx. There was chambers, secret chambers under the Sphinx that Hawass was aware of. He was going to show her, but this has not been publicly released. And why? It's because he was muzzled from doing so. That Elena has shared on more than one occasion how she saw him trying to kind of like reveal information, but he was suppressed. And she had her own falling out with the Freemasons, because one of the things that she did was she was very conscientious in terms of protecting Egypt's artifacts and antiquities, and she noticed that a lot of artifacts were going missing, and these were being taken out of Egypt by the Freemasons. And so when she began to protest to the Egyptians, that she notified the Egyptian authorities, the Freemasons were furious, and they not only concocted false charges against her that drove her out of Egypt, but they hounded her in France as well, where she continued to work as a professional archaeologist until she got some support by a special person, but maybe I'll talk a little bit more about that later. What I'm going to do now is shift to this message that Elena received by High Commander Adana. That was a New Year's message that was essentially making the case that 2023 will be the year of rediscovery. What does that mean? So what I will do now is play the video, and you can hear what Elena had to say about Adana's message about this year. Here we go.
High Commander Adana from the Excelsior. The Earth Alliance, she says, has taken control behind the scenes, militarily, working at taking over all institutions, replacing key personnel. Then she says this: we are here, even if you do not see us. We have always been here. When you do not understand why we are not as visible as you would like to, remember that we are very active behind the scenes, working very closely with your good leaders and our common military programs on planet and off planet. This year, more scientific reveals will be released to the population of Terra. Members of the Galactic Federation of Worlds, such as the UMIT and the Meton and the Silo, have been very active to relentlessly share technologies with many contactees. These people are now going to speak, for they will now be protected by new laws. Interesting. Adana continues and says, 2023 will be the year of rediscovery. Rediscovery of your own sovereignty, of your human cognitive capacities, rediscovery of released technologies, a rediscovery of an ancient past coming to the surface, notably from ions in your oceans. And she ends by saying, open the pyramids. So rush to the pyramids, focus on the pyramids this year, open the pyramids.
So there you have Elena describing this cooperation that's happening between the Earth Alliance and the Galactic Federation and the Cedars and that grouping of benevolent extraterrestrials that want to help humanity move forward and kind of like emancipate itself from the control of the deep state, that these advanced technologies, these ancient technologies, are going to be released. So that's very exciting because it does suggest that we are going to be witnessing some pretty major disclosures happening in the near future. So the disclosure plan and the Giza discoveries, how does that play out? So here's something that an interview I did with Elena just recently, where she explained the significance of the new pyramid chamber announcement with what her extraterrestrial contacts told her about the major discoveries of Earth's ancient history that are on the way in 2023 and how these would involve the pyramids. So she went into more detail about these discoveries, and I think the role of Zawi Hawass is a very interesting one because, as I said, Elena's experience was that he's actually a good guy who had been muzzled and controlled, but now he's going to play a role in the revelations that are to come. So at this point, this is yesterday, this is where the power outage happened. And I'm glad we have with power now. We can continue on, but from now on, this is all going to be new for those that were here yesterday. And what we're going to go into now is talk a little bit more about the role of the Freemasons in suppressing this information. This is what I was going to be talking about, and I found it very coincidental that just as I'm about to kind of go into detail about the role of the Freemasons in suppressing all of this, we had this power outage. But now this is what you didn't hear yesterday, but you're going to hear it right now. So let's move on. So let's begin with this message from High Commander Adana from the Galactic Federation of Worlds. And here's an advertisement I can make. So I'm drinking my Galactic Federation of Worlds coffee mug, genuine coffee. I won't say the source of that, but if you want these mugs, I think ElenaDanan.org, she has a merch shop there, and maybe you can get some. And don't forget my commission, Elena. So this is what Adana had to say. Quote, yesterday, I met with Adana. She showed me holographic blueprints of the Giza pyramid, showing the passageways inside it leading to the largely extended underground complex. She said this discovery is part of the disclosure plan. So this is pretty profound because it's showing us that there is an underground complex there that if you go all the way back to Herodotus, where he talked about this underground labyrinth, this massive labyrinth underneath the Giza complex, that he saw it. He was taken there by the high priests of Egypt, and all of that has been covered up. That underneath the pyramids, you have this incredible complex. And this is what Adana is saying that was seen, and this is going to be real. This will be part of the disclosure process. This is where it gets interesting. So then she goes on to say, the corridor leads to another one that leads to a room containing a technology chair. She says that the Egyptian government is already aware of it, but now it will depend on them what they will decide to do with the information. So there are discoveries, ongoing discoveries under the Giza complex. And now the Egyptian government, and by that you can be pretty sure Zawi Hawass would be part of that loop about what is being discovered and its significance. And this, I believe, is why Hawass is going to be playing a critical role in revealing some of this information. Now we get to the Freemasons. So this is where Adana added that Freemasons are still in places in the Egyptian government, and the outcome of this specific disclosure can still be interfered. As I showed my anger at these last words, this is Elena. This is the transcription of Elena's speech. She said, Adana added, quote, it would only postpone, not stop this revelation. The process cannot be aborted. There are higher powers from the Galactic Alliance looking after the plan. It is only a matter of time. So here you have Adana talking about the Freemasons being in these key positions of control and authority in the Egyptian government, and that in the past that they've muzzled this information coming forward, but now all they can do is delay it or only postpone it. So, and it can't be aborted. So that's very, very interesting that not only do you have Elena's experiences when she worked as a professional archaeologist, where she directly encountered the power of the Freemasons in controlling the artifacts trade in Egypt and how much is to be revealed and when, but she also got corroboration from the Galactic Federation of Worlds. Okay, so some of you might say, well, okay, that's just one source, Elena, and then Elena channeling the Galactic Federation. Well, you can say, well, there's really two sources there. Are there other sources corroborating this? Well, there are. You have Radu Cinema, a Romanian writer who was co-opted into the covert operations of the Romanian intelligence services when underneath the Bujeji Mountains, and in particular underneath the Sphinx on top of the Bujeji Mountains. So there is a Sphinx in Romania, and underneath that there is this Hall of Records. And Radu Cinema describes how he began by interviewing this covert Romanian operative who had very special psychic abilities and other qualities. His name, his pseudonym was Caesar Brad, and what he learned was that the Freemasons used assets in the Romanian government and military to prevent release of discoveries of the halls of records under the Sphinx on Bujeji Mountains found in 2003. Apparently what had happened was that some planes, some military planes, had flown over Romania using the ground-penetrating radar and found that underneath the Bujeji Mountains there was this anomaly. And so an investigation began, and the Freemasons were able to assert their influence through the Romanian government and intelligence service to come in at a very high level without there being any possibility of them being refused access. And in the book, it describes Caesar Brad meeting with this high-level Freemason from northern Italy who is part of that kind of Bilderberg grouping. So, and what happened was that there was an enormous struggle within the Romanian government as to whether or not release this information, but the Freemasons blocked it. And that, and ever since then, there have been joint Romanian-US investigations, explorations of the complex and where it leads to, but that has not been released yet. So that's another source saying how the Freemasons have been behind the muzzling or the secrecy of these ancient technologies that have been discovered in halls of records or pyramids such as the Giza complex and also what exists there in the Bujeji Mountains. Another source is William Tompkins. And William Tompkins, his father and his uncle were 33-degree Freemasons. And he describes in various interviews, and you can collect these interviews with William Tompkins in book 3 of his Selected by Extraterrestrials series, which is available on Amazon. So it describes his views and understanding of the Freemasons, and it's based on his direct knowledge of how his father and uncle kind of like interacted with the Freemasons. And his father in particular was a very interesting person. He was a very successful in building up a dubbing company in Hollywood just during the making of the kind of like black and white films in the 1920s and around that time. So he was able to dub in foreign languages for these movies that were these American movies produced in Hollywood that would then be distributed internationally. So he built up a successful company in Hollywood, and his father was a 33-degree Freemason. Then his father was approached by a group of Freemasons that had more authority. So that confirms that 33 degree is not the highest level in Freemasonry. There are higher levels. And his father was told to do something that was very unethical in terms of these movies, the dubbing. I mean, I believe it had something to do with the fact that they wanted to insert subliminal messages into these dub movies so that they could control and influence the populations of Europe or around the world. And his father refused. And what was interesting was that his father then very quickly lost the company, and he was essentially removed out of the Freemason organization and then fell on hard times and had to. And so William Tompkins describes how his father and his brother had to live with their uncle for a while because of what happened to his father. So what that shows is that the Freemasons are a very hierarchical organization, and up until the 33-degree level, you can have very ethical, responsible Freemasons. So by no means am I saying that all Freemasons are evil, doing all this secrecy and suppressing the truth from coming out. Even up to the 33rd degree, you can have good Freemasons that are very ethical, doing a lot of philanthropic work, which I believe they do. By and large, I think the vast majority of Freemasons do very positive work. But at that very highest level, you have these, whatever they are, whether it's a 34 degree, 35 degree, those are the ones that do some very dark things. Now, as far as William Tompkins' uncle is concerned, he described how his uncle would visit Egypt regularly on a yearly basis and would always come back with all of these artifacts that had been brought back or stolen from Egypt. And this confirms the experience that Elena had, that all of these artifacts in Egypt were being taken out by the Freemasons that engaged in an illicit trade in Egyptian artifacts. And so here you have an independent source corroborating what Elena herself experienced at first hand. Okay, so now let's move on and let's talk about some other sources of ancient artifacts that have been found around the world. And so now we are going to talk a little bit about these artifacts found in the Grand Canyon. Now, on February 28 this year, JP traveled by boat to a cabin in the Grand Canyon as part of a 6-man team. So this was an interview that just came out in early March. We're in April now. And he describes how his team were able to enter into this cabin system in the pyramids. They were flown out from his home location and military base to this place in Colorado, where he was part of a team of 6. They were met by a park ranger, and then they went with this park ranger by boat down presumably the Colorado River or one of its tributaries, and they went to this place, and they got out and then went into a cabin system, and they saw some amazing things. In the interview, JP described seeing Egyptian and other hieroglyphics on the walls, similar to what he had seen in the space arks on the moon and the Atlantic Ocean. So JP's been on many missions, and he has described hieroglyphic writings or writing that looks like the Sumerian, and he's also even identified the Phoenician language, Mayan. He's seen these on arks on the moon and the Atlantic Ocean, and he saw the same hieroglyphs in this cave in the Grand Canyon. He also saw Egyptian-style mummies wrapped in white cloth, stacked into the sides of the walls. So in the interview itself, he just describes seeing mummies wrapped. But later on, I asked him, how are they arranged, JP? And he told me, but I'll come back to that. But just keep that in mind, because I think there was an important point of corroboration here with what I will soon talk about. One of the other things that JP saw, I thought was really significant, which is that he saw many gold tablets with Sumerian-style writing, and he said he lifted these gold tablets, and they weighed about 60 pounds. Well, wouldn't you know it, according to Joseph Smith from the Mormons, he received golden plates from this angel Moroni with hieroglyphics that weighed between 30 to 60 pounds. And Joseph Smith described 11 witnesses that saw the gold tablets. So it wasn't just his imagination that he saw these golden tablets. And here you have JP seeing in the Grand Canyon similar golden tablets with writing on them. Now, JP says he saw Sumerian writing. Joseph Smith says that he saw hieroglyphics. Now, whether one or both are just kind of, whether they're one and the same, they were seeing, or whether they were seeing different things. But I thought it was very significant that both saw gold tablets that weighed around 60 pounds, which for those of you in Europe, I think it's about 26 kilograms, something like that. So what does this tell us then about the Mormons? So on the golden tablets, it talks about the ancient American civilization that was created by prophets. So according to the gold tablets that Joseph Smith was able to interpret with the help of this angel Moroni. Now, I think when we're talking about an angel Moroni, we're probably talking about an extraterrestrial from one of the civilizations, and that they helped Joseph Smith interpret what was written on the golden tablets through telepathic communications, which many people who are contactees have the ability to do. So Joseph Smith gets information about what's written on these tablets, on these gold tablets, and he's told about this ancient civilization that was created by prophets. And he's told Adam and Eve actually were taken to the Americas, and that there are other prophets that made their way to the Americas beginning from 2500 BC. And these were from Egypt, Sumer. So what the Mormon version of history tells us is that there is this ancient Egyptian civilization that existed in the Americas. Now, this is where we need to kind of like go a little bit deeper here. And this is why I have to thank Angelica for pointing this out to me, that, really, we're not talking about Egypt here. We're talking about Atlantis. The Egyptian civilization was an outgrowth of the Atlantean civilization, and that Atlantis had spread itself throughout the world. And that, when earlier I was talking about Thoth, Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, Kukulkan, these were either one of the same or Atlanteans who brought their information with them, their technologies with them, and distributed them to the indigenous peoples of that region and helped them develop flourishing civilizations. Now, the fact that these all look Egyptian is really kind of like not so much that Egypt was all over the place. It was indicative that they all had the same roots, that these were all artifacts that could be traced to a common Atlantean ancestry, just as the Emerald Tablets talk about Thoth and the ancient wisdom of Atlantis being preserved in the Giza pyramid, so in the Giza complex. Similarly, you had, whether it was Thoth, Ningishzida, Kukulkan, or the others, whether they were one of the same, they did the same thing, created pyramids and had the Atlantean secrets buried there. So that means that in the Grand Canyon, you have caverns filled with evidence of these ancient Atlantean/Egyptian technologies, artifacts that just have an incredible wealth of information. And obviously, why haven't we been told any of this? Who's behind the suppression of that? We will get back to that very shortly. So one of the things that I think it's worth pointing out here is that there was, around the time of Joseph Smith, talking about the prophets from the Middle East, Adam and Eve, Jesus, coming to the Americas, that there was a very extensive sharing of advanced technologies that were capable of being able to take people by plane or airship around the world. So there are a number of historical texts that refer to flying chariots, vimanas, etc., used for long-distance travel. And here you have probably one of the most famous, which is the a glyph that's found in the Temple of Abydos, which is cited by many, many sources. Now, I don't know the exact genealogy of this, how old this is, whether it's early 1900s or whether it was somehow doctored, but it's certainly very suggestive that the ancient Egyptians had some very ancient technologies, advanced technologies that could be used for aerial transportation. And we see this in historical texts supporting that thesis. For example, King Solomon's heavenly wagon. According to Ethiopia's Kebra Nagast, King Solomon and all who obeyed his word flew on the wagon without pain and suffering and without sweat or exhaustion, and traveled in one day a distance which took 3 months. So if you traveled by camel, which in those days was probably first-class travel. If you were traveling second class, you'd walk behind the camel and avoid the dung as it's flying out of the camel's rear. So if you're traveling first class on a camel, It takes 3 months to travel from Palestine to maybe the Queen of Sheba, which King Solomon had an affair with. But Solomon had a device that would fly him there. And it would take him 1 day. It'd take him 1 day to get there as opposed to 3 months. And of course, we know other societies also talk about advanced flying machines. The Vimanas in Vedic India, they talk 2 texts. The Mahabharata and Ramayana describe flying ships, Vimanas, used by both sides in a great war circa 1400 BCE. So what this tells us is that it wasn't just Atlantis, which was circa 11,000 years ago, where you had these ancient flying machines. Around 2500 BC or 3000 BC, you had similar flying machines being used by different cultures. So around that period of time, around 3000 BC, whether we're talking about Egypt, whether we're talking about India, whether we're talking about China, here's another example, China, the Chinese Emperor Shun, who lived in the 3rd millennium before our era. The traditional date is 2258 BC, is the first flyer recorded in history, according to Bertold Laffer in the book Prehistory of Aviation. So this tells us that around 2500 BC, you had the Sumerian civilization, then you had the Akkadian civilization, then you had the Babylonian civilization. But these civilizations, that there were technologies that were used at the time that could take leaders long distances through the air. Now, this technology was not widespread. It wasn't something that was available to the common Joe. So you couldn't just, get a ticket or get on the flying machine and travel around the world. You have to go by camel or whatever the transportation device, boat or whatever. But for leaders, the kings, they could travel through these machines because these flying machines were restricted to only very few. Apparently, it was restricted to those who have the right genetics or the right consciousness to be able to use these technologies. Now, what I found very interesting about the legends of flying machines in ancient China was that these technologies were given to the Chinese emperors by an ancient race of bird people. So, quote, legends of the Far East describe a race of flying people or birdmen who gave instructions for building flying machines and attaining immortality. They lived in the Kunlun Mountains, Bertold Laffer. So, this, and there you have a map of China, and down here you have Tibet, and the Kunlun Mountains are around here, as I recall, Kunlun Mountains. So that kind of Tibetan plateau around there, you have the Kunlun Mountains where these bird people live. And again, you have this idea of attaining immortality. And one of the, as I've already mentioned, Ningish Zira, or Thoth, understood very well the principles of immortality and how to attain it. And Thoth, of course, from Egypt, Garuda from Indonesia, Ishizuchi from Japan, the Anunnaki, this from the Sumerians. So we can talk about Enki, we can talk about Prince Ea, we can talk about Ningish Zira, Kinara from Thailand. You have these different cultures representing bird people. Here you have the Anunnaki, here you have Thailand, over there, Japan, Ishizuchi, Garuda, and of course Thoth from Egypt. So these bird people were understood to be beings who had this advanced aerial technology that they shared with humanity at the time. So this takes us to the Grand Canyon spacecraft that JP says that he saw. He says that at the end of the cavern system that was designed for, he saw a spacecraft that was designed for a very short race of people or beings that he thought were the ant people. So there's a clip I wanted to play from this interview I did with JP earlier in March. So I'm going to play that clip for you now.
There was a type of ship there that was metallic, and it was just parked there. And it's different from all the ships I have seen, Doc, because you could feel the humming, similar to the experience I had in Brazil. When you feel this, it's not anxiety sensation, but you feel good. You feel like excited. You feel a good vibe about the place. And it looks similar to these ships that were parked, the one I saw in that other mission, all those ships that were parked, but this one was up close and I could see. And the archaeologist that was with the ranger, he went to it and he touched it, and a door opened sideways from the ship and no stairs came down. So you had to like get up there by jumping or grabbing the edge of it and climbing in. No ramp or nothing came down of it. And this ship did not have no legs. It was just on its belly and on the dirt, on the sand. There was a couple rocks. It was the size of like 4 minivans altogether, 4. So maybe 50 or 60 by 60.
Feet we're talking about.
Feet? 60 feet by 60 feet.
Okay.
It's a good size. But we looked inside and it's like for little people, not for our size, smaller people. I saw writings on it, like the same writings I saw with the ant people. Really similar writing. But I think it was more ancient. And I also saw in the ship, you could see, like, you could put your hands on, like 2 hands side by side, and it has layers that you could fit also human hands on it. And I think that's the way you control the ship, putting your hands in there, and then quantum communicates with you, with the brain, and you go from there.
So you were actually inside the ship. So were you were you able to walk around, or did you have to go on your knees or something, or crouch?
No, I had to crouch. We all had to crouch.
Okay, so there JP talks about how he and his team went inside this spacecraft that was located at the end of a series of rooms in this underground cabin in the Grand Canyon, and how the park ranger was. And in the rest of that interview, the park ranger describes how his job is to keep this secret from the general public. So the interior, I forgot what it's called, the National Park Service, that they actually are responsible for keeping a lot of this secret from the public. But nevertheless, there in this chamber is this spacecraft. Now, when JP described this to me, I thought there were a lot of similarities with this story of the dropper stones, which comes from China. From that, there was this region on the border of Tibet and China where there was a crash of a spacecraft, and that the beings that came out of that crash interbred with the local population, creating the dropper people. And these people had some of the advanced technologies that extraterrestrial civilization brought with them. So the dropper stones, for those of you that aren't familiar, these had that kind of configuration. They were made out of some stone. I can't remember the exact type of stone, but they were circular. And I think it was Russian scientists were able to find that the grooves on these stones contained a lot of information about ancient history. That the dropper people had understood how to record history or record using some kind of technology where they could transcribe some oral history into these records. So that story of the dropper stones and its association with an extraterrestrial craft, that's described in a book called The Chinese Roswell by Hartwig Hasselhoff, and you can find that on Amazon. But I thought it was very interesting that you could see why it would be that an ancient people who benefit from interaction with extraterrestrial visitors who land or crash land would revere these people, and whatever technology they brought with them or spacecraft would be revered. So I think that kind of like would give us an idea of why it was that Grand Canyon would have that sequence of technologies in there, and then at the very end you have a spacecraft, because that would be the kind of holy of the holies. So the dropper stones record the history of the ET technologies given to the hybrids. And there, this picture is said to have been taken by Dr. Carroll Robin Evans during his 1947 expedition, shows the dropper ruling couple, Huripiala, who's about 4 foot, and Vila, 3 foot 4 inches. So if you have these dropper people being a hybrid of these extraterrestrials that arrived and through a crash landing on the Tibet Chinese border around 13,000 years ago, and they created a hybrid race that were only 3 to 4 foot tall, I think we get an idea of whoever it was that built the craft that JP says he experienced. Some kind of being that may be integrated with the ant people to create some kind of hybrid. So this takes me to, okay, is there any corroboration for JP's incredible story about the Grand Canyon? When he told me this, I looked around, and this is what I came up with. JP's Grand Canyon visit has many experiences with a very famous expedition, 2 sets of expeditions organized by G.E. Kincaid, and it was written up in the Arizona Gazette on April 5th. Now, I think it was the Arizona Gazette. I think the Smithsonian incorrectly referred to it as the Phoenix Gazette. I might have that backwards, but nevertheless, it was a story that came out, and it described things inside of this Grand Canyon cavern that G.E. Kincaid saw. So let me walk you through what it was that he saw. So G.E. Kincaid was a well-known explorer. He worked with for the Smithsonian Institute, and in 1908 he went down the Grand Canyon, sailed down the river, the Colorado River, and he explored the cavern system for several months. And his second expedition, he led a team of Smithsonian scientists, including one called Jordan, Dr. Jordan, where they went inside of this cavern where they saw incredible artifacts. So this is what he saw according to this story in the Arizona Gazette. According to the story related to the Gazette by Mr. Kincaid, the archaeologists of the Smithsonian Institute, which is financing the expeditions, have made discoveries which almost conclusively prove that the race which inhabited this mysterious cavern, hewn in solid rock by human hands, was of Oriental origin, possibly from Egypt, tracing back to Ramesses. Very interesting that they could connect the discoveries inside of this Grand Canyon cavern with the Far East and Egypt. The story continued. Nearly a mile underground, about 1,480 feet below the surface, the long main passage has been delved into to find another mammoth chamber from which radiates scores of passageways like the spokes of a wheel. So there's a lot of passages in there, and this is a diagram. I can't read the what's written there. I mean, this is a very low resolution photograph, but it was developed by Jack Andrews, who, using the information in this 1909 Phoenix Gazette story of the 1908 expeditions described the layout of the caverns, of the cavern system. So there you have like a central passageway with all of these spokes, like these passages, like the spokes of a wheel going out. And there were kind of like a lot of chambers with a lot of hieroglyphs, like here. So this was what was described in this story, and it describes several hundred rooms that have been discovered, reached by passageways running from the main passage. So an incredible discovery. Kincaid says that, told the journalist that they found stones with hieroglyphs inside. So again, this kind of like the golden tablets that I mentioned earlier that JP says he saw with stone inscriptions, that this was something that Kincaid says that he saw in the Grand Canyon as well. If their theories are born out by the translation of the tablets engraved with the hieroglyphics, the mystery of the prehistoric peoples of North America, their ancient arts, who they were and whence they came, will be solved. So you have Kincaid seeing tablets similar to what JP saw, and he also saw giants. JP saw a lot of mummies, sarcophagi in there. Egypt and the Nile and Arizona and the Colorado will be linked by a historical chain running back to ages which staggers the wildest fancy of the fictionist. So recall what I had to say about the Mormons and the golden tablets that Joseph Smith was able to translate with the help of Moroni. He talked about an ancient Egyptian civilization that had been operating in the Americas around 2500 BC, that figures came over. And as I talked about earlier, around that period, there were these flying ships. So, of course, it makes sense that the Americas were reached by very influential leaders who were able to fly to the Americas from the Near East, from Egypt, from Sumeria or Mesopotamia, from that region, and bring with them these incredible knowledge and information. Now, what was very interesting was Kincaid described seeing stacked mummies in the Grand Canyon. And I mentioned earlier, when I asked JP about the mummies, he said, well, he saw a lot of mummies in there in my initial interview with him that came out in March. Then when I saw this, I just asked JP, well, how were the mummies arranged? That's all I said. How were the mummies arranged? He said they were stacked on top of each other. And then I sent him this illustration of what G.E. Kincaid saw, and he said, yeah, that was it. That's what I saw. So what JP was given access to was, I think, the very same cavern system that G.E. Kincaid saw in 1908. So we're talking 115 years. No one else that we know of has been allowed to go into that cavern system and talk about it. JP is allowed to talk about it for many reasons, but one is that he works with a group of Nordic extraterrestrials who have reached agreements with the US Air Force for JP to be given access to a lot of things and to talk about it. That's part of the agreement. So hiding the truth in plain sight. So one of the principles, well, I think when you look at the map of the Grand Canyon, what you find there is a lot of place names. And here you can see some of these interesting place names that allude to Egyptian, Hindu locations in the Grand Canyon that refer to ancient artifacts. So up here you have like the Shiva temple, the Osiris temple, the Isis temple, and there you see how the Grand Canyon is organized, the visitor center and so forth if you visit. And there's this Crystal Creek. This Crystal Creek, I think that's probably where JP was able to access this cavern, and where G.E. Kincaid went as well, probably there. But not being an expert in this, I asked an expert, which is Brad Olson, to share with me his knowledge of the Grand Canyon and where these places might be, or these place names, and where this secret cavern might be, because there's up to 1,000 caverns in the Grand Canyon. So this one that JP and Kincaid visited, whether it's the same or different ones, but having similar technologies inside, Brad had something to say about that. And so let me play that video clip of Brad.
By looking at these monuments, wherever they are, in Giza or in the Grand Canyon, there's also quite a bit of evidence for what we were talking about. So, for example, in the Grand Canyon, when we were prepping for this interview, I did these screen captures of the area that is around the Crystal Canyon. This Crystal Creek is where the Kincaid expedition went. And while there are many tributaries that lead into it, and some are very beautiful, such as the the Colorado River that I mentioned, but also the Yavapai Indian with these emerald green pools that flow out to the Grand Canyon. But on these maps, you can see a lot of evidence for Far Eastern influence. So the place names around the Crystal Creek, Cheops Pyramid, there it is, right there next to Crystal Creek. Right upriver is Isis Temple, but also other Far East names, such as Shiva Temple is the name of a rock formation, Buddha Temple, Brahma Temple, Zoroaster Temple, Shiva Temple, Confucius Temple, and then other Egyptian place names like the Tower of Ra. So why go to all the trouble of naming these things of Far Eastern origin? And by the way, this is the part of the Grand Canyon that is completely off limits. So when I suggested to our raft operator, hey, we'd love to get out and do a little exploration, no, that's off limits. I'd lose my license if I let you go. You absolutely cannot go. So just like in Antarctica, where there are known no-fly zones and no-go zones, same thing with the Grand Canyon. And Michael, it just smacks to me of a cover-up that they're keeping people out of there for a very good reason, as they have something they don't want us to know that exists there.
Yeah, I mean, that is kind of like very revealing. I mean, those maps that you shared, with all of those place names. I mean, as you said, those Far Eastern place names, Shiva's temple and Buddha's temple and so forth. To me, I look at that and I say, oh, well, this is the kind of metaphysical law that the deep state follows, which is you hide the truth in plain sight. That they, as long as they reveal the truth, I mean, you hide it in plain sight, you reveal the truth, but by naming all these places in the way that they did, that it's right there, it's right in front of you, but then they take out all the evidence and then they hide it, and they can say, well, we revealed the truth. If people can't work it out, well, we don't blame us for their stupidity.
Yeah. It's an occultic way. It's called the revelation of the method, that they reveal themselves, say, hey, look at all these place names. We told you where it was, but we're not going to tell you exactly where it was or what it is. But it's an occultic way of, in our free will world, where every human, by law, by cosmic law, we have the right to free will. We have the right to make our own decisions, but we can be tricked into this false paradigm. And that's what they love to do. They actually get pleasure out of tricking us into this false matrix narrative that they have finely tuned and have spoken on and pushed down our throat for many generations. But it's not who we are. And eventually it will break down and fall away. But in the meantime, we're left with the little crumbs, like all these place names in the forbidden part of the Grand Canyon, where the Crystal Creek cave system was said to be, that you can't go to, but here's all these names suggesting what's exactly there.
Okay, so Brad Olson, I think, really hit the nail on the head there. I mean, that this is exactly how the deep state operates. If we're talking about Freemasons, we're talking about the Smithsonian Institute, those that are behind the decisions to keep this information secret from the general public, but yet they will hide the truth in plain sight by naming these different locations in the Grand Canyon after the things that are buried there. And I mentioned, here's some more: Zoroaster Temple, Brahma Temple, Buddha Temple, Cheops Pyramid, Tower of Ra, and so forth. So it's like exactly as Brad says, that this is a kind of hermetic law that the deep state has to follow in order to fool people. That as long as they reveal the truth, and if people can't figure it out, then they feel under some sort of cosmic law that they can continue to hide the truth. So you're figuring it out. Many of us are figuring it out, that this is exactly what's going on. But the Grand Canyon does have a lot of these ancient technologies buried in these very locations that are given these Hindu, Far Eastern names. So now we get to space arks and the ancient technologies.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.